My beloved child, there is something different about this moment, something you can feel even if you cannot explain it yet. If you were guided here without fully understanding why, do not dismiss that quiet pull inside you. It is not random. Something unseen has already begun shifting around your future in ways your eyes cannot yet register. Before this exact moment arrived in your life, before you reached this point of awareness, a thought about you quietly took root in someone's mind with unusual intensity. It was never fleeting or casual. It did not pass like ordinary thoughts do. Instead, it stayed. It returned again and again. It deepened with time. And even now, as you are listening, that feeling is still unfolding somewhere beyond your awareness. Do not turn away, because what is forming here carries more weight than it first appears. There is someone who has reached a point where imagining their future no longer feels complete unless you are somehow part of it. What surprises them most is how quickly this shift happened, almost without permission. At first, they tried to label it as simple curiosity. Then they called it admiration. Then they convinced themselves it was just attention to detail. But none of those explanations were enough, because slowly, everything about you began to build meaning inside them. The way you speak, the way you pause before responding, the quiet presence you carry which lingers even after you leave. None of it passed unnoticed. Each detail started forming a larger picture in their mind, and there is one moment in particular that changed everything for them. Something you may have thought was ordinary became unforgettable to them. A word you spoke, a small action, or even a moment of silence shifted something inside their perception of you. Since then, they have compared ordinary days to that single moment without even realizing it. Stay with this, because what is unfolding beneath this awareness is far more significant than it seems. They are not only wondering about you in passing thoughts. They are beginning to imagine what life would look like if your paths were no longer separate. That thought did not appear suddenly. It formed through hesitation, through inner resistance, through repeated attempts to dismiss what they felt. They tried to slow it down, to rationalize it, to step back from it. But instead of fading, it only became clearer. And what makes this even more meaningful is that their thinking is not purely emotional. It is careful, deliberate, reflective. They are noticing how your presence brings a sense of calm in places where they usually feel restless. They are realizing that even small memories of you carry a warmth that outshines far larger experiences from their past. Do not skip ahead, because this part carries real significance. Some people enter lives temporarily, leaving only faint traces behind. But there are rare individuals whose presence begins to influence future decisions long before anything is spoken aloud. And you are becoming one of those rare presences in someone's inner world. That is why they sometimes grow unusually quiet. In those silent moments, they are not absent. They are thinking deeply, weighing possibilities, asking themselves questions they never expected to ask so soon. What if this is real? What if this connection is not temporary? What if this feeling arrived for a reason? Even though they have not voiced these thoughts, their behavior already reveals fragments of them. They may check for you more often than before. They may remember small details you mentioned without realizing. They may revisit conversations long after they have ended, replaying them in their mind. None of this is accidental. Something inside them has started assigning importance to your presence. And part of what strengthens this feeling is the sense they get from you, something subtle, yet undeniable, a quiet steadiness, a grounded sincerity, a kind of emotional depth that doesn't demand attention but naturally holds it. Stay until the end, because what is developing here carries deeper layers. What they feel is no longer just attraction. It is the beginning of something they believe could extend beyond temporary emotion or passing excitement. That is why thoughts of a shared future appeared earlier than expected. Because the heart sometimes recognizes stability before the mind can explain it. Even now, while they may seem uncertain outwardly, internally they are closer to clarity than they realize. There is also something they have not shared with anyone. They have imagined speaking to you directly, openly, but every time they reach that imagined conversation, hesitation stops them. They question timing. They question readiness. They wonder if speaking now would protect the connection or risk it. This is not weakness. It is caution born from importance. Do not skip, because the next realization is what intensified everything. Something recently happened, a moment of distance, silence, or brief absence. And in that space your presence became even more noticeable. They realized how strongly your absence is felt, and that realization changed everything, because silence has a way of revealing value. What once felt simple now feels significant. What once felt light now feels meaningful. And once something gains emotional weight, it stops being abstract and starts becoming personal. This is why thoughts of building something real arrived sooner than expected. Not because everything is decided, but because ignoring the feeling is no longer possible. And even beyond what is visible, something deeper is unfolding internally. You are not just crossing their thoughts occasionally anymore. You are entering their future reflections without permission. Ordinary moments get interrupted by reminders of you. Quiet moments stretch longer because your memory appears unexpectedly. Even when they try to focus elsewhere, their mind gently returns to the same question. Why does this feel so different? The truth is, they have tried to explain it logically, but not everything meaningful begins with logic. Some feelings arrive as certainty first, and understanding follows later. At first, they believed it was temporary, but it persisted, through distraction, through distance, through time, and persistence turned it into something they can no longer dismiss. Now they begin asking themselves a quiet question about every future possibility. Would it still feel complete without you in it? That question does not fade easily. Recently they noticed something in you that goes beyond surface impressions. They saw how you carry yourself through uncertainty. They saw a calmness in your energy, even in moments where words are few. And that impression stayed with them longer than expected. A new thought began forming, not rushed, not impulsive, but considered. Maybe this connection is not something to overlook. And that is why their mindset is shifting. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. They are no longer questioning whether you are memorable. They already know you are. Now they are questioning whether they should allow this feeling to move forward before timing slips away. Do not skip, because this is a delicate stage many never notice. It is the stage where feelings are protected before they are revealed, where silence becomes careful, where words are measured, where every interaction is replayed afterward. Outwardly, everything still seems normal, but internally, something is growing louder. And there is another reason this feeling arrived earlier than expected. They have already seen enough to believe you are not just another passing presence. Not because everything is perfect, but because something about you creates emotional certainty in a world where certainty is rare. They have also imagined the possibility of losing this chance to someone else. And that thought unsettled them more than they expected. It revealed something they did not want to admit. The idea of not having you in their future feels heavier than they were prepared for. Since then, they have become more observant, more aware of subtle changes, tone shifts, pauses, distance, small emotional cues that once went unnoticed, because when someone begins envisioning a future, even the smallest detail starts to matter, and what may surprise you most is that they may not even realize how visible this has become in their energy. A single message can affect their mood. A short interaction can linger in their thoughts for hours. A quiet moment with you can stay with them far longer than expected. That does not happen without depth. And beneath all of this, there is something else they are slowly realizing. They trust how they feel around you more than they trust many external voices. Not because they decided to, but because something in your presence feels steady, calm, and real. And that is why they are no longer viewing you as part of the present alone. They are beginning to imagine what continues beyond it, what remains if this feeling keeps growing. What stands out to them most is not simply that you occupy their thoughts, but how naturally those thoughts now appear during moments that matter, in quiet reflection, in decision-making, in the spaces where people usually think about what truly shapes their life. That is when your presence shows up most clearly, without effort or invitation. And because of that, your place in their mind no longer feels accidental. It has started to feel connected to emotional certainty itself, as if something in them recognizes you as part of a deeper pattern forming over time. Stay with this, because what is unfolding here is not superficial. Recently, they asked themselves something that quietly shifted everything. If the opportunity to build something real appeared right now, would they still hesitate? That question did not fade after it appeared. It lingered. It repeated itself in different forms, and each time their response became less uncertain. Because the more honestly they reflect, the more they notice a consistent truth. Your presence brings a kind of emotional grounding they do not easily experience elsewhere. Not intensity that comes and goes, but stability that remains even in silence. And that stability has become rare enough for them to recognize its value. This is why thoughts of a future involving you no longer feel sudden or unrealistic to them. Instead, it feels like something slowly earned through repeated moments where your importance revealed itself without force. Do not move past this too quickly, because this is where their realization deepens. There was also a moment not long ago when they tried to imagine the possibility of you drifting away without ever understanding what was forming in them. That thought created an unexpected heaviness, not dramatic, but deeply quiet, and within that quiet feeling, something became undeniable. The idea of losing even the possibility of you feels more significant than they initially believed it would, and that realization changed the way they now approach everything connected to you. Since then, their awareness has sharpened. They pay closer attention to your responses, your tone, the subtle shifts in your energy, not out of control or expectation, but out of a growing desire to understand whether what they feel internally has a place in reality. Because for them, this is no longer just something felt privately. It is something they are beginning to take seriously. And what strengthens this even further is how consistently your presence returns in their mind, not in forced thoughts, but in natural moments. A sentence you once said, a brief interaction, a quiet memory that resurfaces without warning. These moments have become more frequent than they expected. That repetition has changed everything. It has made your presence feel less like passing thought and more like something integrated into their emotional awareness. And while they may not express this outwardly, internally something important is forming. Hope has begun to replace hesitation. Where they once questioned what to feel, they now find themselves wondering what could realistically grow from it. That shift alone changes everything. Because hope makes people pay attention differently. Even small gestures begin to carry meaning. Even brief responses feel significant. Even silence becomes something they try to understand rather than ignore. Stay until the end, because this next realization is where their emotions become even clearer. There was a moment when they noticed something simple about you, something unplanned and completely natural, the way you existed without effort to impress, without trying to be anything other than yourself. That moment stayed with them longer than expected, because authenticity leaves a deeper imprint than performance ever could. And since then, they have not only thought about what you do, but how your presence makes ordinary situations feel different. That difference is what continues to stay with them long after the moment has passed. Recently, something else surprised them. Even in crowded environments, even when surrounded by distractions, thoughts connected to you still rise above everything else. That was not something they anticipated. They expected the feeling to fade with time or distance. But instead, it strengthened. And that is why the idea of a shared future no longer feels distant in their mind. It feels increasingly possible. Do not skip this part, because what comes next explains the direction their emotions are moving. Their growing desire is not driven by urgency, but by recognition. They recognize something in you that does not feel temporary, something steady, something that does not require explanation to be felt. And that recognition is what keeps bringing their attention back, even when they try to focus elsewhere. Now, a new question keeps appearing in their mind more often than before. Should they remain silent, or should they begin to move closer to what they already feel? That question does not settle easily anymore, because with each passing moment, silence feels less like protection and more like uncertainty. And still, there is another layer beneath all of this, a quieter fear. The fear of changing something that already feels meaningful between you. The fear that speaking too soon might shift what currently feels stable. So they remain careful, measured, observant. But carefulness does not stop growth. It only delays expression. And what is building inside them is no longer something that can remain unexpressed forever. The emotional weight has reached a point where it continues to return, regardless of distraction, regardless of time, regardless of effort to step away from it. That is why your presence is no longer just noticed occasionally. It is becoming part of how they interpret their emotional world, part of how they define what feels real, what feels safe, what feels worth holding on to. And the most important truth is this: they are no longer asking whether you matter in their life. They already know you do. Now they are slowly realizing they can no longer pretend that what they feel is small. It has already grown beyond that. And somewhere within them, the future they once kept distant is quietly beginning to take shape around that realization. That sense of peace has stayed with them in a way they did not expect. It has become something they remember, something they return to in thought, something that now feels too meaningful to treat lightly, because real peace is not common. And when someone finally encounters it in a person, they begin to hold on to it differently. They have also started imagining conversations that have not taken place yet, moments where honesty is no longer filtered through hesitation, where words are not reduced or softened, where they finally express more than they previously allowed themselves to say. But every time those imagined conversations form in their mind, they pause, not because they do not feel it, but because they want it to happen at the right moment, a moment that feels steady, natural, and complete enough to carry what they truly feel. And that hesitation itself reveals how significant this has become for them. Do not move too quickly past this, because this is where their silence begins to make sense. When emotions gain importance, people often protect them before they express them. They wait until they believe the timing can support the truth they carry. That is exactly where they are now. Their feelings are ahead of their expression, while their words are still trying to catch up. But even in that delay, something is shifting. Each passing day brings them closer to expressing what they have been holding back, whether through tone, through behavior, or through unexpected moments of honesty. Stay until the end, because the reason behind their growing certainty goes deeper than simple emotion. They are beginning to believe that what they feel is not temporary. It does not fade with distance. It does not weaken after silence. Instead, it remains present even on ordinary days, quietly consistent in the background of their thoughts. And that consistency is what makes them take it seriously. Because people do not start imagining a shared future without reason. It happens when something within them begins to feel lasting enough to consider beyond the present moment. Even if they still appear composed on the outside, internally they are already crossing emotional thresholds they never expected to reach so quickly. Do not skip now, because this is where a deeper realization begins to form. They have started to wonder if this shift is visible at all, because before words change, energy changes. Before confessions happen, attention changes. Before clarity arrives, presence itself begins to shift. And somewhere along the way, something in them has already changed direction. What once felt uncertain now feels significant. What once felt small now feels impossible to ignore. That is why the future they are beginning to imagine no longer feels distant or unrealistic. It feels increasingly natural, even if not fully defined yet. Not because they have all the answers, but because the feeling itself refuses to fade. And when something continues to remain strong through time, silence, and reflection, it usually means it is trying to become something real. Something important is beginning to take shape. And while it may not be fully visible yet, it is no longer hidden in the same way it once was. Because eventually, a feeling that repeats itself enough times inside a person begins searching for expression. It starts looking for form, for direction, for reality. And that is where they are now. Do not skip, because this is the turning point they are quietly approaching. They are no longer asking whether you matter in their life. That question has already been answered within them. What remains now is something more serious, more reflective. What happens if they stop holding this feeling back? What happens if they allow it to move forward instead of keeping it contained in silence? That question follows them through ordinary moments, through quiet evenings, through times when everything looks normal on the outside, yet something continues building internally without pause, and the more they try to slow it down, the more clearly it forms. Because genuine emotion does not disappear when ignored. It becomes clearer when it survives silence. Stay until the end, because this realization carries even more weight. The reason this feeling arrived earlier than expected is because they sensed something in you that felt steady from the beginning. Not loud, not dramatic, but quietly consistent. Something that made tomorrow feel slightly more meaningful simply by being part of it. That kind of presence is rare. And because it is rare, they began treating it carefully without fully realizing it. At first, they told themselves they needed more time, more clarity, more distance to understand what this was. But time did not weaken anything. Instead, it added depth. Every passing moment made the feeling more defined rather than less. Every memory stayed longer. Every interaction carried more weight than expected. Every detail became harder to overlook. Do not skip now, because this explains why their behavior may begin to change. There are moments when they almost reveal more than they intended, moments when their attention lingers longer than usual, moments when their responses carry a subtle depth that was not there before. Because when sincerity grows, it naturally begins to show itself, even when a person tries to contain it. Presence becomes different, awareness becomes sharper, connection becomes more intentional, and if observed closely, these shifts are noticeable. A slightly longer pause, a more thoughtful response, a quiet effort to stay connected even in simple exchanges. These are not coincidences. They are signs of something becoming difficult to keep entirely unspoken. Stay until the end, because this next realization brings everything into focus. They have imagined a conversation with you many times, not one filled with pressure or intensity, but one built on honesty, a moment where they no longer speak around what they feel, but directly from it. In that imagined moment, they are calmer than expected, because deep down, they already sense that what they feel is real. What remains uncertain is not the feeling itself, but the timing of when it should be revealed. When does silence end? When does clarity begin? When does possibility turn into something real? Those questions are no longer distant. They are becoming closer, more frequent, and harder to ignore. And with each repetition, the distance between thought and action grows smaller. Do not skip, because this truth is essential. They have also come to understand that meaningful connections rarely begin loudly. More often they begin quietly, then slowly become impossible to ignore. That is exactly what has happened here. What started as attention became emotional attachment. What started as curiosity became certainty. What once felt simple has now evolved into something they associate with the future. And once a person begins to imagine permanence, ordinary perception no longer applies in the same way. Stay until the end, because this final realization is the most important. The reason this feeling may move toward action sooner than expected is not urgency. It is recognition. They recognize that what they feel with you is not something to dismiss or delay without thought, not something to rush, but also not something to ignore. Because when a feeling survives doubt, time, and silence together, it becomes something rare enough to take seriously. And that is exactly what has happened. Even now, while nothing may be openly said, something within them has already changed permanently. Your presence is no longer just part of passing thought, it is part of serious reflection, part of future consideration, part of what they now associate with what truly matters ahead. And very soon, what has remained unspoken may begin to take clearer shape through action, through words, or through a simple moment of honesty. Because when a heart becomes certain enough, it no longer stays entirely silent. And when that moment comes, it will become clear that their silence was never emptiness. It was preparation.